the success of the whole co-production project, and hence to real movement forward and progression in both mental health research and mental health services. So I'm very pleased to see such a fantastic lineup, which we've got for you this afternoon to discuss this very, very important topic. And it's such a fantastic lineup that I'm not going to speak for much longer, but just move straight on to our first guest. And I'm immensely pleased to welcome Professor Tim Kendall, the National Clinical Lead in Mental Health, who is going to outline for us the current challenges. Hello, Tim.
Hi, can you hear me?
Absolutely, yes, loud and clear.
Good. So, well, thank you very much. And I'm very pleased to be invited. I want to start off by saying I couldn't agree more with Niall about the centrality of rights, co-production, of course, but right at the heart of mental health, ever since its inception, some 150 plus years ago, there is a power imbalance between the service user, as you might call them. Certainly nowadays you'd call them service users. I think in the past that might have been stretching it, as most of them would not be voluntarily doing so. But power and force and the rights of people is very much central now to people's thinking. And I've recently come back from the Global Ministerial Summit on Mental Health in Paris, which is the third summit, which was devoted to rights for people in mental health, as well as COVID. And I'm pleased to say that next year will be in Italy, where actually community mental health has been, and the whole debate around rights and human rights has been there since the 70s and 80s. So important changes. We haven't gone far enough, and I'm aware that probably the single most important harmful effect in mental health is a direct result of what we as professionals do in restraining people in inpatient units. And that obviously carries very significant risks. Okay, so I'm not going to be talking about that. I'm going to be talking about what we're doing at a policy level in addressing inequalities. And in particular, looking at inequalities for, I suppose, racialized communities. So first, next slide, please. So I'm going to look at very briefly at our advancing mental health equality strategy. I'm also going to look at some basic metrics around inequalities in performance. I'm mostly going to talk about the patient and carer race equality framework, which I have not produced, but I think is very important. It's been led by people like Jackie O'Dyer, along with others like Colin. And then as a postscript, just to give you a little bit of detail about our analysis of the patient and carer race equality framework. So next slide, please. Okay, so this is about advancing mental health equality strategy, which we have published, and you can get it online. I think that if you click on the link, it will take you there. But essentially what the advancing mental health equality strategy is about is, first of all, well, what are the sort of key supporting local systems have we got going? And that will include the patient and carer race equality framework, which we've developed. It's also things like we've got pretty much every program in mental health driven from the centre, so new money coming in, up to £2.3 billion. Each of those programs has a transformation pilot or set of transformation pilots. And for every one of those, we are asking each of the sites to say what particular aspect of equalities are they going to address. So we're trying to make sure this is an integral part of any change for the future. We're also doing work around provider collaboratives, and we're measuring. The provider collaboratives are basically taking what are currently specialist commissioned services like secure care or perinatal inpatient units or whatever. And these are all being repatriated to localities so people stay as close to home as possible. But it also means linking up those £2 billion worth of services to localities so that we can move towards deinstitutionalizing many of those services. Now, those provider collaboratives, one of the 6 measures that we're putting into, are you achieving what you're meant to be achieving? One of them is about inequalities. So we're doing it in there too. Now, we're also looking at data quality, and it's absolutely true. I'm sure a major criticism of where we are now, and have been for some years, although it's improving, is that the quality of data that we pick up from localities does limit our ability, our intelligence actually, about what actually is going on. But that is a major part of the work that we're doing, which is to improve data quality. And I suppose the third part of the strategy is around workforce. We want to get to a point where locally, every mental health workforce reflects the population they serve, in terms of serving those racialized communities, but also other groups. Okay, next slide, please. Now, the most important bits here, I mean, do read the stuff on the left at your leisure, but the 2 bits that I want to draw attention to, one is IAPT. Now, IAPT is the psychological therapies that you can get in primary care. There's about 10,000 therapists across the country, gradually built up over the last 15 years. Unique in the world, don't think there's anything quite like it. Now, what is especially unique about IAPT is that it's got some really very detailed and reliable data. One of them is recovery rate. So that's judged by measuring someone's clinical state when they come into the service on questionnaires in the main, and then measuring them at the end after they've had treatment. And the average is roughly about 51% of people have a complete recovery. Probably another 15% have a sustained improvement. But you can see in that top graph that people coming in who are white British have a better recovery rate than people from Black, Asian, and minority ethnic groups. And I'm sure that if you got a more detailed breakdown of those racialized communities, that you would find some would be worse than others. And it's worth bearing in mind on top of this, that actually access to IAPT is lower in a number of groups of racialized communities. Now, the bottom graph is about inpatient services. The blue line is for Black, Asian, and minority ethnic groups. The dark blue line is for white British. And you can see that for the white British, of all the white British people admitted, 15% of those admitted across the year have never been in touch with a community mental health service. Whereas for BAME groups, we're talking about being over 20%. So what that tells me is that racialized communities are not able to, or are not, for one reason or another, accessing community mental health services at an earlier stage, and thereby are being admitted as their first port of call. Not good. Next slide, please. Okay, this is the patient and carer rate equality framework. And Niall, you have to tell me if I need to speed up. So this framework, there's 2 bits of work going on here. We've got 4 trusts which are listed there: South London, Maudsley, East London, Birmingham, Greater Manchester. we've got this patient and carer race equality framework, which has 3 parts to it. And we're asking those trusts to do 2 things. One, we're putting in a questionnaire about organizational competencies, which I'll come to in a moment. We're asking their staff and their patients, have we got this right? But we're also asking the governors of those trusts to have a look across their trusts and to see what extent they can get the Pgraph, the patient and carer race equality framework, into each part of their trust. In the long run, we want every trust to have their own Pgraph. Now, the Pgraph has 3 parts. One is part 1, statutory and regulatory obligations. And you might, this is my interpretation of it, you might think this bit is, if this was all in place, if this was fully accepted within a trust by all staff within it, we would be in an ideal position, and we would be able to say that racialized communities were no longer being racialized by mental health. So if we had the Human Rights Act, the Equality Act, the Workforce Race Equality Standards, the CQC well-led domain, etc., use of force, Mental Health Act, etc., you know, we would be in a very different position. Part 2 is to identify what are the organizational competencies, and we'll come to those in a minute. What are the core competencies that a trust has to have to be able to move to part 1? How are they going to get to the point where anyone walking into the trust gets the same service, whatever their background? And the third part of it is, how do we assess this? And that's being led by Jackie and others. It's not Jackie on her own, obviously, but Jackie and others. And they've developed feedback and assessment tools which will tell us how well these organizational competencies have been taken up. Next slide, please. Okay, so those in the boxes, they're the organizational competencies. They were competencies identified by Jackie and her group within the Mental Health Act review. We think that there's a very good chance that they are the right kind of competencies around workforce, co-production, co-learning, staff knowledge and awareness, cultural awareness, and so on. Now, what we've done is we've put this questionnaire around, basically asking staff and patients in each of those 4 trusts, are these the right things? And you'll see in the bold bits below that of the 10 organizational competencies, staff and patients have told us that cultural awareness comes out as the most important. 76% said so. Partnership working, 67%, etc. And you can read the rest yourselves. Now, it's worth bearing in mind that the returns, we've had 289 questionnaires as of 4th of October, but 70% of those are from staff. So we are now looking to break down what's the difference, 30% carers and patients. But so if you go to the next slide, that will just give you a better sense of what this data really is saying. So look at the pie chart at the top, and you'll see that 67% of the returns are from professionals, 20% are from patients, 15% from carers, and 13% from others. And that basically will be voluntary groups, that kind of thing. People who've got a significant interest in mental health and are associated with that trust. And then if you look at the healthcare category by ethnicity, then you look and on the graph below, you'll see that so if you see the patient group, so that represents 20% of that 289, and you'll see the breakdown that the lowest 2 groups are white and Asian, and the largest 2 groups are mixed and black. And whereas you go further right to the professional groups, the largest return by a significant margin is from white professionals, and the lowest is from mixed professionals and then black professionals. So that just gives you a caveat about what this data is saying, but we hope to get much more data, and eventually we may be able to say something a bit more solid. But in any event, we are watching closely what these trusts do about seeing to what extent they can develop their own Pgraph across their trust. So that's me done, I think.
Thank you very much, Tim. Now, to build a bit on what I said in the introduction, I think I said that when I started Lancet Psychiatry, the idea of co-production was in its infancy. I think I should clarify and say that co-production, of course, is a long history before that, but it was the beginning of really professionals in research and in clinical services really seriously engaging with this idea, which had, of course, had a long history. And it's really good to see in that presentation, you know, that engagement is really now taking hold and is being delivered, hopefully, in clinical services. So with that in mind, I'd like to thank you again for that fantastic summary of where we are now. And I'm going to hand over to Dr. Sade King. Sade.
Thank you so much, Niall. Thank you. That was a brilliant way to introduce the conference today. I now would like to invite my colleagues Adji Lewis and Marcia Rigg to tell us a little bit more about themselves. And we are going to be having a discussion today about the lived experience use of force.
Thanks very much, Sade. Thank you very much, Colin, for including Marcia and I on this platform. It's something that we've wanted to do for a while. And in fact, we do quite often. We talk to various groups wherever we can. Marcia is well known. Harvard, she's in America a lot, and of course not since COVID, but she talks to, you know, lots of university students, and I'm following on behind her. I'm 2 years behind her because Sean died 2 years before Cheney. So, but without Marcia's help and encouragement, I don't think I'd be as far ahead as I am. So thank you, everybody. It's really good to be here. I'm just going to quickly share because we don't have long. And as you can imagine, a lot has happened in 11 years since Cheney passed on. And a lot happened in the 7 years that it took us to get an inquest, 7 years to get an inquest from the day he died. But that's something that I hope to just touch on very briefly. I just like to always start to talk about Cheney because he was my son. He was our son. He was the youngest of 3 children. We call him our gentle giant, our shining star. He was 23 when he came back one day and said, "Mum, they've given me something bad." He'd been out to celebrate the end of his master's. He was going to go to America to do his PhD. And that bank holiday weekend, August bank holiday weekend, he became very agitated, and it became very clear that he would need to seek professional help. So to cut a very long story short, we ended up at the Maudsley first in the morning, which was a good experience, a really good experience. But then we were told that we had to go to the Bethlem Hospital. I don't know if people know the Bethlem Hospital in South London. I must say now, let me declare my interest. I work very closely with SLAM now to try and improve things, to improve conditions. And I must say, SLAM, I know I don't like the name SLAM, but South London and Maudsley NHS Trust are really trying to shake things up, to change practices. But anyway, we ended up at Bethlem as a voluntary patient. He knew he was a voluntary patient. He knew he could leave at any time. But unfortunately, when he wanted to leave, an orderly didn't tell his superiors, just call the police. And he claimed that there'd been criminal damage because Cheney had knocked the door. But the next day, we didn't see any evidence of that. But anyway, that's what they claimed. And Eventually up to 11 police officers came, 11, and included 3 women. And they were asked to restrain Cheney. He was injected again. He'd been injected all day, nothing had happened. He hadn't even been assessed by the doctor. But anyway, they took him down to the seclusion room. And of course, Cheney had been in 1 in the morning at Maudsley. So he put his hands on the door frame to stop going in, but they pushed him in. He fell. They tried to do what they call a cell extraction, which is restrain the person and then hopefully the police will get out. But Cheney was quite quick. He was very sporty, and he got there before them. But anyway, eventually they battened him. They restrained him. Now with 2 sets of restraints, hand restraints, quite unusual, not the normal police restraints. And basically it was 1 under his chin and 1 round his back. So he was on his stomach in a prone position with 2 sets of handcuffs, 2 sets of leg braces, restrained by 2 sets of police officers. They'd split up into 2 sets. So, you know, 1 would restrain, then they'd get, oh, we got tired. Oh, we had to take off our jackets. We had to call for water. Yes, and what about the person you're restraining? Had you thought of him? But obviously not. So this restraint lasted approximately 40 to 45 minutes. And when he went limp, they thought he was faking it, pretending. So instead of giving him CPR, they left him to die on the floor, left the room, the door shut, find the key, open the door, do CPR. And all the time this was going on, the doctor and nurses were watching, either unwilling or unable to help. Eventually, they did resuscitate Cheney, but of course he'd been brain dead for 45 minutes. So when we found him at a Mayday hospital, our local hospital in Croydon, he was on life support. Eventually a brainstem cell test was done and we switched off the life support machine. Now, we didn't know what had happened. It's a very long story. We didn't know what had happened, but it was an Evening Standard came knocking at our door to say that a whistleblower had rang them. Did we know what had happened to our son? No, we didn't. Do you mind if we run the story? No, they did. They did it for 2 nights. And that's how we found out initially what happened to our son. So I've explained that. Took us 7 years to get an inquest. Now, this is not this normally takes a few years. 7 years is quite unusual, but it takes quite a few years for some families. We had 2 investigations by a not for fit for purpose IPCC, as it was then. It's now the IOPC. Basically at that stage, it was police officers investigating police officers. So of course, it wasn't a very robust investigation, but eventually we had our inquest in 2017, and it was 29 days of evidence, 3.5 months. And the jury found Cheney had been restrained unnecessarily, excessively, disproportionately, and what was the other thing? Unreasonably, okay? And that had contributed to his death. Nothing happened to the police officers. There was a disciplinary, which was basically calling another police force to come and investigate a police force. Nothing happened, no accountability, nothing. And as Marcia will tell you, there are very, very few. In fact, I think there's only been one police officer who we're going to hear about later, who has been imprisoned, the police officer who killed Dalian Atkinson. I think there was one other case many years ago. Marcia might know more about it, but anyway, there is never any accountability. Never, never, never. Nothing is done. The police officers are just carrying on doing their own bit, their own work, you know, as they've always done. But can I tell you something? You don't kill people, innocent people, and get away with it. I firmly believe whatever religion you are, or whether you believe or not, you do not do things like this. You don't do it and get away with it. No, you have to think. I just talk because I don't want people, families to go through what we've gone through. I don't want people to die like Cheney died, very horribly. And I just actually, let me just read something that the witness, the doctor in the inquest said, I felt like it wasn't a human being that they were trying to restrain. It was like trying to contain an animal. After they tied him up with the straps, it seemed like when a hunter has tied the animal, it was an uneasy feeling that I had, that it's not a human being that they were restraining. That's what many, many, many hundreds of Black men go through when they die at the hands of the state. No accountability. They're treated worse than people treat their dogs. I mean, Marcia has said they give their dogs medals, but they can kill human beings with their hands. Heaven help us if we were in America, where they shoot, but here they kill with their hands. Please, people, think. Don't call the police into mental health units. They have no place there. Come up with a better solution. Don't do prone restraint. De-escalate. Step back. Think of a person as a human being. That could be your mother or brother or child. You don't get away with things like that. Karma has a way of coming back to haunt you. And I know, because I have friends who are married to a policeman. I was a teacher before I became a lawyer, and a lot of teachers seem to marry police officers. I don't know why. Anyway, but it doesn't go without consequences. I really want us to face facts, face what we're doing. It's good that George Floyd, I mean, it's not good that he was killed. It wasn't good, but what I'm saying is we saw it. And so it made people aware of what was happening. But people here in England think it doesn't happen in England. A lot of people, most people, they don't know what's going on. They see things in America, you know, CNN and this, you know, but no, it's going on here in England. I'm going to let Marcia, sorry, Marcia, I've probably taken too long. I want Marcia to speak now.
You know what? The door literally just knocked. 1 second. I apologize. Literally.
Let me just. Yes.
Yes, keep talking, Najee.
Okay. This is unexpected. But I just wanted to thank Marcia because she is the glue that holds a lot of families together. We have a loose cooperative of families. Called the United Family and Friends of those that died in state custody. And we work together loosely. We have no funding, but Marcia is the glue. She goes to inquests all over the place. She talks everywhere. You know, I do my little bit, but she is the glue that holds us all together. Over to you, Marcia.
Thank you very much. I really apologize, but I just had a delivery. So yeah, that's why. Right. Ajay, that was so powerful. And thank you so much for opening our presentation so truthfully and passionately and honestly. And thank you also, Colin and Tim, for your opening presentations and for inviting us to speak and to listen, because we are pretty critical of yourselves, but it is for a good reason, because it can happen in your families, believe it or not. Cheney died after Sean, and he should not have, because this is what happened to Sean 2 years earlier by the Metropolitan Police as well. And Sean had a history of mental health. So I'm going to speed up 20 years of my relationship with SLAM, the South London and Maudsley. I have a contemporaneous file, and I was concerned about issues within the mental health system long before Sean died. And it was the issue of medication, medical restraint. It was the issue of confidentiality. We're dealing with the carers, the family and the patient. You know, we're having discussions here with the carers and the patients, and it's really important that the families are included. I know sometimes that's not possible, but we're one of the same, that it really works well when you have a joint relationship together, because it was managed for 20 years with Sean, where Sean could have had his untimely demise, his death, you know, in other countries, and perhaps Tin and the other academics at SLAM will be able to look at Sean's history, that you know, he was known to the mental health, should not have died on that day, because there is a pattern that is reoccurring in every patient when they come to a particular incident, which is a psychotic episode. They are extremely unwell, and so they are vulnerable and should not receive a death sentence, whereas both Cheney and Sean did. So Sean was extremely unwell on the 31st of August 2008, where erratic 999 calls were being made by his mental health staff to take Sean to a place of safety. There were no beds available. Nobody had contacted me. Remember, you know, I had a 20-year relationship. You know, I was contactable at the end of a mobile phone easily. No one did contact me. And the police refused to come, Brixton Police Station. They said that he hadn't done anything criminal, and that, it was not a police matter. And that Sean went onto the streets because SLAM didn't have any beds. They just said, call the police. You know, they could have done something a year before, at least a week before. He hadn't taken his medication for 2 months, and he was only on half his usual dose, which we only found out 4 years later at an inquest. And so they should have been aware that Sean was going to encounter a crisis, and it could have been prevented, and the jury found that. But they allowed it to get into the hands of the police, and the police treated him as a criminal, and they knew it was Sean. They went out to get Sean. You know, there was a period of 3 hours. You know, they claimed that on the day that they didn't marry up the 999 calls. And the fact that is, when they did apprehend Sean, they didn't recognize him as being someone with mental health issues. He was carrying his cancelled passport, something that he always carried when he went abroad. And so he could have been identified. And it was a cancelled passport. So there's photographic evidence of that. And they claimed that it didn't look like Sean and that he had stolen it. But the evidence is that they didn't use their radios to check, which only takes, seconds or a few, seconds, less than a minute, to make that radio in and check the passport number. That was not done. That he had assaulted an officer, yet there was no witness to that. So the officer, Sean was a martial arts expert, and I'm certain that if Sean had hit the officer twice, that he would have known about it. But there was no injuries, and there's no, by his own accounts on the CCTV later that evening, he was not injured. There's no medical evidence to show that. But he was restrained in a prone position, face down in grass, at the back of his neck, where there is medical evidence to prove the excessive force that was used because of the deep bruising found in Sean's left top shoulder and the knee. So a witness had just moved in that day and happened to be looking through the window and was on the phone to her friend, who said, You know, oh my God, what kind of an area have I moved into? Because she sees the police on top of this black man. And, you know, she was a white teacher and she phoned her friend and she just took 2 pictures to say, oh my God, I wonder if I've moved in the right place. Lo and behold, it was the best evidence unwittingly that she was taking, because it proved that Sean was in that position in the space of 4 minutes. The fact that Sean was not resisting arrest, that Sean was under control, because someone was gripping his feet, his ankles, one of the officers. His feet and shoes had been removed. The passport is in the photograph. You know, he had been searched. His pockets were open and the driver had gone to get the vehicle. The jury found he would have been in this position for 8 minutes. Think of George Floyd for 9 minutes. Sean was for 8 minutes. And Cheneys was for 45 minutes. Just think about that. Because you can die in the space of 4 minutes if you were being suffocated with a pillow, for instance, like this. That's murder, right? It takes X amount of minutes. A gun takes a few seconds. But Shawnee and Shane died at the hands of excessive deadly force by police officers that's supposed to be in your care. He was then rushed to Brixton police station, the back of a police vehicle, not a hospital, where the officers claimed that Sean was so fit and healthy that he could spin on his back, handcuffed to the rear, upside down with his feet up, spinning 360 degrees in a cramped cage inside the van, where the police claimed that they were looking at him do this. There were no cameras in the van, you know, since which I've campaigned for that. And we do now have cameras in police vehicles, and body-worn cameras, vital evidence, so that we can see what happens during a restraint, and not just the IPCC that relies on the accounts of the officers, the only witnesses normally to a death. Or if there are other witnesses, they're just watching like the nurses did. You know, he was sped to the Brixton police station, kept at the back of the vehicle for 11 minutes, where they claimed that the custody suite was busy and that he was being violent in the back of the van. He'd been restrained for 8 minutes. You know, the medical evidence meant that there would have been a lack of oxygen going to his brain because he wouldn't have been able to breathe. He's in grasp with excessive force. So he couldn't have done that action. He would have had to been on his head breakdancing to do that. He would have been in and out of consciousness to have done anything of the sort. And that's what the jury found. He would have been in a V position, either upside down like that or hog tie with his legs up in the air or the other way. You know, he couldn't have done that. So when he got to the station, they kept him there for 11 minutes. There's all sorts of discussions going on within the custody suite. And, you know, eventually he was removed and he's in a collapsed state after a few seconds of being, you know, carried heavily by officers at the shoulders. It's all on CCTV, where Sean dies on camera. You know, he's evidently unwell, and his head is hanging, he's completely collapsed. The officer's evidence is, oh, we thought he was asleep, and he was faking it. That means his eyes were closed throughout the whole time. Think about that. They thought absolutely nothing of it, that he was faking it and he was asleep. You know, somebody at Brixton police station, one of the most notorious stations in this country, you know, somebody that's been violent, a black man, you know, he's been brought into the station and he's all being bad and dangerous. Oh, but you can sleep, even though he never spoke, because they said that he never spoke once. Oh, we thought he was mute. But you can hear them on the CCTV saying, he's dying, he's dead. And excited delirium, and you can't get a dead man standing. You know, because he's dead. You know, they stood him up. You know, his head is hanging. The officers bend down and stand him up. It's all on camera. The public has not seen the full footage unless you followed the case and came to the inquest and the misconduct hearing and the perjury trial and, you know, all the things that followed after this, you know, horrible night where Sean's literally at the feet of officers, half naked, handcuffed still, and the officers are standing around him, blocking the cameras, because there were cameras giving a bird's eye view that have gone missing or were not working, and all sorts. I cannot explain it in these 7 minutes, and I'm sure I've gone over the time, so I'm going to move fast forward, where 4 years later we had an inquest, and the jury found that the actions of the officers more than minimally contributed to his death. The coroner did not allow unlawful killing either, or neglect, which was nonsense. And so we had a narrative verdict. But the jury were phenomenal. They used the same words as in Cheneys' case: unsuitable, excessive, unnecessary, because the inquest system is not a criminal jurisdiction. So they couldn't use the words like strangulation or choke, or, willingly did this murder. You can't use those words. It's all very carefully orchestrated, or though that jury saw the criminality and used the appropriate wording. We had the case reopened as a criminal investigation by the IPCC, the first of its kind. We had the first of its kind, the Casale review, which was a robust investigation into Sean's case, the way that the IPCC had investigated it, and the way they investigate deaths generally. So, Seni's case, Aji's case, should have been investigated much better, because they were already looking at the way that they investigate cases. It took 7 months for the officers to be interviewed. There was a lack of information that we as families received, the access to the body, and the fact that we were given a decomposed body for burial, the fact that body parts were missing, when we did get our own pathologist. I mean, there was a whole range of inadequateness and, incompetence and cover-up blatantly to families. And, the delays. We did have the first perjury trial, where the officer claimed that he'd went to the van and looked in Sean's eyes, that Sean was fit and healthy in the back of the van when he was kept for 11 minutes. But we proved, they had spliced it by 29 seconds. When we got hold of it, we realized the sergeant didn't go to the van. So he explained in detail what he saw Sean doing, and he shouted at him, and he looked him in the eye, and Sean was on the left side and he was sitting on the chair. A complete fantasy, a lie, something that never happened. He remembered it in detail, but he can't remember, what actually happened on the night. How? There's CCTV. It should be scorched in your memories. I'll show you what happened on the night. We had a criminal investigation by the Crown Prosecution Service said there was insufficient evidence. The reports have never been publicised, neither is the new criminal investigation by the IPCC that sent it for 6 criminal charges. And it's never been put in the public domain. We then had a public gross misconduct hearing. All the officers were exonerated. One of them became a priest in the Church of England. We can go on. Yeah, there is no justice. The statistics are all good and well, but the lived experience and reality of what's happening is in complete contrast. Lessons have not been learned, and we do not need another report, and we do not need to keep doing all these reviews, and we know what's what. We just want care and change of mindsets, and we want accountability, and we want justice, and it is absolutely imperative, because we see Sarah Everard, the first time of a proper, robust investigation where an officer got life imprisonment, quite rightly so, for murder, for kidnapping somebody. I could say Sean was kidnapped, for being put in been handcuffed. They raped her, burned her. It was a cover-up. And robustly and quite rightly so, he got life sentence. Well, there's a whole load of murder cases. We want our cases reopened to be treated just as robustly. We don't need another public inquiry. There is going to be another inquiry. It is not wide enough. You know, we're going to hear a little later about Dalen Atkinson, where an officer has gone to prison, and I thank the person that's speaking about that. It is now ample time. There is ample evidence and reports. Just stop killing people, loved ones. Have a heart, and let's make real effective change. Thank you.
Marcia, Aji, I'm left completely speechless, but all I can say first and foremost is thank you for sharing. I know, I can only imagine how painful it is to even tell what you've been through, what happened to Cheneys, what happened to Sean. And I'm so moved, and it was so powerful. And I thank God that you are involved in the work that you are, and working with institutions who have wronged you in so many ways, but continuing that fight and continuing this work. I commend you. I have so much respect for you both. And I know that we need to move on, but this is a really important question that I would like to ask you both. So as a Black woman myself, and as a newly qualified clinical psychologist, this is a really important question for me, because I want to know what I can do in the system. And what I want to ask you is how have these experiences impacted on your trust in the system? I can only imagine the answers, but I wondered if you could speak to us about trust and about your faith in the system.
For me, thank you, Shade. For me, you have to trust. It's not easy. I've moved forward because of my Christian faith. I've had to, was asked to forgive, and I reluctantly did it. And yeah, that's how I'm able to manage. But you know, it's traumatic. It has effects on all the family. My children, 2 daughters, don't really want to engage too much, because I've got 2 grandsons who've lost their uncle, and one of them was very close to his uncle, but it affects the whole family. And Cheneys' dad, he's been ill. It's traumatic. It affects your health. It affects my mental health. We don't even get counseling. We have to arrange it ourselves. We do everything ourselves. We fight the battles ourselves. That's why you'll find, you know, Marcia, it's a lot of women, mums, daughters, sisters. We do the fighting, because maybe it's because we've had children, or you know, we've got that inner strength. And what I keep looking at is the fact that Cheneys would fight for me. If it was me, he would be fighting for me. So I've got to fight for him. I've got to fight. I don't know, Marcia.
It's a very simple question to ask. Do you have trust in the system? No. And that's it. Simply because we have not been able to depend on them, and the evidence is in black and white. Mm-hmm. Decades of evidence in this country, you know, from the Windrush generation to today, literally, to the United Nations report that was recently came out last month, talking about this very issue. Because it's not just in the United Kingdom, it's global, of police brutality and use of force, particularly on Black men, and the issue of racism, which is what we're talking about today. It's nothing new. You know, they hide the evidence, you know, but we know it's there. they say that they're not institutionally racist.
Mhm.
Well, I tell you that they are, and they are institutionally corrupt. And we need corporate manslaughter. I saw that somebody put that earlier in the chat. Absolutely correct. Because the state has to be held to account. Because these agents of the state are accountable to them. But the state has not afforded the families the respect of these people to their human right to life. It's as simple as that. Whether by colour or creed or race, these people are human beings. And Black people are being treated less than human beings. They will never admit it, but we know that. And so, they have not shown trust. They are not willing to give us that trust. Certainly to date, they are just ticking the boxes, and I'm fed up of it. In the meantime, people are dying and the families are traumatized. I won't repeat what Angie just said, but we are left traumatized indefinitely. But it's important to talk to our future generations and the younger generations to change the mindsets so people can understand what the word racism actually means. The fact that they've not done anything and they don't care is racist. Racist is a made-up word. Business as usual. We're still on the plantation. It's just modern-day lynching. We're receiving chokeholds instead of being hanged on trees, and we're being handcuffed in all ridiculous ways. Instead of being chained and whipped. It's no different. It's just modern. We're living in the digital times and not the slavery times and the Ice Age and the Stone Age. It's just the digital ages, and people are more aware, and it's international. And so there is no trust in any system. So it's a refutable question, really.
Yeah.
Unless
I feel there has to be hope, and I feel that's for me. I'm an optimistic person. That's how I've managed to get through. There has to be hope. People, we have to do what the state won't do. That's what we're fighting for. It's so easy to lose hope. It is easy to lose hope, but you've got to face things. You've got to change things. I like. There's a quote I like. Apparently, Mark Twain may have said it, but he said the only people who like change are babies in wet nappies, and that's true. But change has to come. Something has to change, something has to give, because as we are sharing, more people are aware. That's good. The digital age, that helps. Zoom conferences, it all helps. So
but
people take individual responsibility to make change happen. That's for me.
Absolutely, and I agree. Because as you are speaking, Angie, and as we are all speaking, somebody is dying in this country. Health and in police custody. That's how vitally important it is. 1 in 4 people suffering in mental health. That's a report. It's probably much more now, especially after COVID. And it's an absolute emergency and crisis now. And it's in the public's interest that we do this, and the government is seen to do it. So yes, we hang on to hope, and we pass on the baton, and that's all on to. We're not in this game to lose. We're in this game to win.
I know that we've gone over time, but I wondered if I could ask you both, what can I take? I'm committed to this work myself, and this is what I feel I was called to the profession to do. I feel this is why God put me in this position as a clinical psychologist. I just wondered, what do you think I can both do? If there was any sort of words that you would like to just, even just words that I can hold in mind in my practice, because this is so important to me, and I know I'm going to remember you two for the rest of my life, but I just wondered if there's any last words. It doesn't have to be about change or anything, but I wondered if there's anything that you wanted to kind of leave this space with. Marcia?
Because we've only got a short time, I'm going to say two phrases. I can pick something up. my hero, Angela Davis.
Oh, amazing.
He says, walls turned sideways are bridges.
Mm-hmm.
Turn the walls already. Jump over the bridge. The bridge is falling. I want you to jump over the bridge on the other side. Walls turned sideways are bridges. And just never give up.
Yeah.
Advice.
Yeah.
My
And
beautiful
for me, sorry, Nelson Mandela's Nelson Mandela, James Baldwin, and Martin Luther King Jr. But Nelson Mandela, it says it's always seems impossible until it's done. And it's not impossible. We can do it. We can see things changing slowly, you know. And, we have to face the facts. I think James Baldwin said, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced. And that's what we're putting before you. We are putting things before you. People say, this can't be true. Go on our websites, it's all out there. The inquest, it's all out there. There's nothing hidden nowadays. We have campaigns, so, anyway. We can go on. Let's other people, Kevin, because I'm very proud of Kevin and Cheneys Law that we have got, which is a step in the right direction. It's not everything, it's a start. But yeah.
I just want to thank you both so much, Aji, Marcia. It's been an absolute privilege to share this platform with you. And I'll remember this conversation for the rest of my life. Thank you so much for inspiring me. You're both the reason that I do this work. And I'm just going to hand back over to Niall to introduce the next speaker.
Thank you very much, Shade, and thank you, Aji and Marcia, for such brave and powerful testimonies, in response to which really no words feel adequate other than to say on a personal level how much I admire your fortitude and also your compassion and your optimism. So thank you very much. And without any further ado, I'm going to now hand over to Kevin.
Yep. Thank you, Niall and Colin, for organising this event. And of course, to Aji and Marcia. There are no words for the value of the work you do and how privileged I feel to just be a part of it. My name is Kevin Ario, and I'm a PhD student at King's College London, and I'll be speaking to Cheneys Law and some of the projects that we've been involved in with the families to try and implement this law as effectively as possible to reduce restrictive practice. Next slide, please. I'll start by saying that the Mental Health Unit's Use of Force Act is a new piece of national legislation. It was put forward by a Labour MP called Steve Reed in response to the death of one of his constituents, which was due to excessive use of force on the mental health unit in the Bethlehem Hospital. That constituent was Olusheni Lewis, and to honour his legacy, the act is widely known as Cheneys Law. The main focus of the law is, first of all, to reduce the use of restraint in mental health patients and to train staff in the use of alternative ways of keeping people safe. There will be provisions, for example, to distribute information to patients and carers, to make sure that data is collected accurately and responsible, as was alluded to by Professor Tim Kendall, and also provisions such as the use of body-worn cameras being mandatory by all police on mental health units to really try and make services accountable for this. There are also policies at a higher level that are designed to improve transparency in every trust. So, for example, in every trust, there will be a named person who will be accountable for their local policy on use of force, and they will report back to the Secretary of State for an annual review. Next slide, please. So I wanted to go in depth into two of those areas that I put forward, just to show what we've been doing in South London to try and preempt Cheneys Law, well, to be working in anticipation of it. And one of those areas is in training staff. One of the things that SLAM will be doing is co-producing a course with Adji Lewis that we're going to call Cheneys Story. And the intention behind it is to really give insight into the real impacts that these events have had on families and local communities. I know that one of the themes here today is co-production, and I've been reflecting a lot on just how difficult it is for the families to keep continually telling their stories. So I'd encourage everybody to look at the resources that we have in United Friends and Families, or the documentaries that we've put out, and I'll say more about those later. SLAM will also be reviewing their clinical training, and there's been engagement with a wide range of stakeholder groups, and importantly, not just staff, but also community members, people who've lived experience of restraint, and their carers, and there have been visits between other trusts. And essentially what we're hopeful of doing is to by inviting all of these different perspectives and sharing these personal testimonies, is that we want to bring something different and really empower staff to challenge the cultures that lead to restrictive practice. We think that now is especially a good time, now that there's a different discourse around race and around Black men. And in Cheneys' case, for example, he was restrained by up to 11 police officers. And we really feel that we need to address the interactions between clinicians and the police, and really rethink the police's role in mental health provision, full stop. Next slide, please. Sorry, next slide, please. Yeah. Now, there are two sides to Cheneys Law's policies on information provision. It's of course important to have a means to collect accurate information. So data on the use of prone restraint, for example, and between ethnicity, that we don't really have at the moment. But we hope there will be a lot more thought also put into how we provide information for families and carers. We know that in many cases, there is frankly mistrust between services and local communities, and we would like the information on what care a person will receive to be framed in a way that really supports people with lived experience and their carers to be as involved in that care as possible. The key question here, I think, is how do we communicate information around care and around medication and restrictive practices to people in the community? And for us, I think it means working with people both who have never been in the system, as well as people who have been in the system but might have had bad experiences of care. We're really thinking about how different people prefer to access and process this information. And so we'll be using things like social media and community assets to convey these messages. But I think we also have to think about what's the impact of communicating our practice. This means that we are likely to be challenged, and that we need to be open to being challenged and to reflect on what it might be that we aren't seeing as mental health professionals. It reminds us of the impact of restraint on families, even when the practices are considered necessary by staff to keep people safe. And overall, we just think that having this dialogue will bring us much closer to the people we're trying to support and to the organizations who are already supporting them, like Inquest and like United Friends and Families. Next slide, please. So I know that I don't have much time, so I just wanted to give a quick run through of the focus groups we did as part of the consultation, the government's consultation for Cheneys Law. I also volunteer with a charity of Black mental health staff called Colourful Minds, and we wanted to feed into the statutory guidance for Cheneys Law before the law comes into effect in the near future. And we felt this was really important to get right, because the statutory guidance will have a huge bearing on how professionals interpret Cheneys Law. We were also aware going into this work that Black people in the UK are disproportionately more likely to be restrained, detained, and to have police involvements than white people are. And I've put some research in the chat if anybody's interested in that. And we really weren't very confident that Black people's voices were being truly heard or heard enough. So we set up 2 diverse focus groups, one with people with lived experience of having been restrained, and one with staff who have worked on inpatient wards. And we spent 2.5 hours with each group scrutinizing the guidance. Next slide, please. And just very briefly, we found in general that patients and staff were really quite aligned in their views. When we asked participants whether there was a culture of use of force that was designed to get people to comply, 100%, so basically whether the use of force is coercive, 100% of people with lived experience either agreed or strongly agreed, and also 3/4 of the staff did as well. So the complexity really wasn't in getting people to agree, it was more in figuring out the wide range of issues that can lead to restrictive practice. And there were more nuanced issues about what is appropriate versus inappropriate use of force, and how Black men in particular can be stereotyped and perceived as risky when in fact they are the people who need protecting. Next slide, please. I just wanted to pull out a couple of quotes, but I'll make the report available in the last slides. So building on that theme of perceptions and unconscious bias, one person with lived experience, who was a Black man, reflected that he thought staff were restraining the stereotype of him, of course, because he was a Black man. And in the second quote, we spoke a lot about unconscious bias, and I think that's really reflected in that quote. Our staff quite clearly felt that quick and easy solutions weren't enough, and that what we actually need to do is promote lifelong learning to combat the stereotypes and the unconscious bias that can lead to disproportionate use of force. Next slide, please. Now, drawing all of this together, I think some of the take-home messages is that Cheneys Law provides a useful structure, but the actual changes we want require a cultural shift in services. I don't think we fully know what that change would look like. So we first want to encourage reflection in our roles as individuals, as professionals and organizations to challenge the underlying perceptions and assumptions that lead to use of force. And then once we do that, we can lobby the government for more detailed change. What we also really need is more detailed research on seclusion and restraint. I'm a researcher, and as has been mentioned before, we're trying to address structural racism. And in order to really have a good picture of what we need to change, we need detailed data on ethnicity and other protected characteristics across services that's reliable. We also need to know which holds are being used, especially since so many men have died in the prone position, including Seni and Sean. And finally, we need to make some concrete resource commitments once we decide on what actions that we want to take. Next slide, please. So I'll share these slides after the presentation. And this here is just an overview of the Colourful Minds report, which you can read in your own time. Next slide, please. Aji and Marcia have worked with us to produce a film called R.I.P. Cheney, which really goes into these issues in more detail. It's only 20 minutes long, and I would really encourage you to have a look so that it places less onus on the families to have to repeat their story. And finally, I just wanted to shout out, next slide, please. Yeah, I also wanted to shout out that the United Friends and Families campaign are doing a march on Saturday, Trafalgar Square, 12 p.m, where it's an annual march that they've been doing for over 20 years now. And it's really to campaign for the rights of the families to be, well, to put forward Cheneys Law, but also for their own personal support. They are, without them, none of this work could have been done. Right, thank you.
Thank you very much, Kevin. I think that the feeling which I've got so far in this webinar is that this is a story of failings on multiple levels in services. And that's why it's really good to see that your approach seems to me to be addressing the complexity that a failure on multiple levels then demands a response on multiple levels, and not just legislation, but also that business of culture change. And I think that's something which we can maybe come back to later. But for now, I'm just going to move on because I believe we now have a short film addressing race in the co-production relationship.
Mia, can you show that film I sent you, please?
Yes, just give me a
Just the
second.
first one. We haven't got time. Just the first one would be great.
Okay. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Ardia Lewis, Marcia Riggs, both had relatives that were murdered in restraints. I'm just wondering about the vulnerability. Do psychiatrists and professionals see the body quite differently in terms of restraints, in terms of a racialized way that we need to change? Because the numbers of black men that died in the mental system under restraint, we've got a new legislation coming up. Now, I'm not quite sure you can talk about personally whether you have a micro perception of why this is taking place. What can we now do to address it?
Well, it's difficult because I guess that's asked to put myself in the shoes of the people that made the decision to restrain whoever I was. But I can probably think that if somebody's different from me, and the more different you are from another person, we know that that can create. You know, if somebody looks very different, actually maybe sounds different, maybe express their emotions in a different way, or if you're just not used to speaking something, I'm sure that plays a role.
Ardia Lewis, Marcia Riggs.
You could stop that, but it's the same film again. If you could stop it, I'll just, yeah, just this one very quickly.
Another first person question. Looking at this journey of vulnerability for consultant psychiatrists working with race. How do you, in a mental health assessment, when you section somebody on a 2 or 3, how do you reflect whether you work really in a co-production way or suppressive? How have I used my power as a white person? Do you ever go through those reflections in terms of how we can change the system based upon those reflections?
I don't think it's always possible. I wish it were. I don't think it is always possible that you can go through those different stages. Sometimes, I'm just talking about the reality of it. You're in A&E, it's early in the morning, someone is acutely unwell, they're not engaging. We've tried it, and we have the benefit of having a different professional as part of that assessment. So we do psychiatrists and mental health professionals in the room with them. They're usually from social work background. And a lot of times they will bring in a lot of that, or they will challenge you about, well, actually, you think about why is this presentation that different? So they, and if they don't agree with the doctors, so the system is already geared up for having that different
Mayor, can you stop it? Because I don't think we can hear it. Is that okay? I'll just talk. Mayor, can you stop it?
Yep, it stopped.
Yeah, so just to put into context, I'm just aware of time. My name is Colin King. I'm the organizer with Simon Clark for the Whiteness and Racial Equality Network, who got this seminar off today. Just like a big thank you to people like Bill and Anna and a range of people. But what we're trying to look at, based upon the painful and powerful narrative that came out this morning, and I hope it may have had us all in tears, is looking at, do white psychiatrists really understand race, racialization and power, and how they may violate the Black body? That video is a transcript of a range of videos we'll be looking at about how do we develop at the macro level, the interaction level, because somebody who has a lived experience of schizophrenia, who's been restrained since the age of 17 in the Maudsley in prison, beginning to realize that there needs to be a redistribution of power to Black men and families to make the state accountable, the police, consultant psychiatrists. But I want to go on to the most painful moment that happened a couple of years ago. Mia, can you bring up Michael Bennett's PowerPoint, please?
Yep.
It's only going to take a few moments. And maybe some of you remember this, that restraint doesn't always happen to Black men inside mental health hospitals or prison. You may have heard the story of Dayton Atkinson. We're going to have a short discussion on, because I really want to catch up with time. Hopefully the volume would work. Can you just press the video on Dayton Atkinson, please?
The video is not working.
It's not working. Okay,
No,
then.
sorry.
That's okay. You're sacked. We'll get somebody else to come in next week. So let me paint the picture before Dr. Michael Bennett comes in. Michael Bennett, this is Black Her Story Month, because it's really about women and how pain, devastation, violation, and power has been taken away, but also the relationship with Black men. Dr. Michael Bennett, historical, is one of the first and only director of services, welfare, mental health to the professional game. And one of the things he had to deal with, quite sadly, was a young Black man walking home at night, ex-professional footballer, tasered for 53 seconds, kicked in the head, murdered and died. That had a devastating impact in the world of sport, but also told us the reality that there were abuses, not just in mental health and outside of sport. Michael has written one of the most important papers for the Lancet Psychiatry, looking at race, mental health and sport. And I also must say today, as an outstanding moment that marks Black History Month, that Marcia and Arja have also written papers that will be in the Lancet Psychiatry as well. Just want to ask Michael, is Michael still on the line? Because I know he had an emergency. He's still there, Michael?
I am, but I'm still dealing with this emergency. But
okay.
I will try to, yeah.
Yeah, just basically, Michael, thank you very much for coming today. And I think it's really impressive that we have really Black skinned practitioners from Sade, yourself, and we're going to look at a Black consultant psychiatrist in the next presentation. Just quickly, just to make up time, how did it make you feel? And I mean, how did the family feel going through the powerful narrative we've heard from this morning?
Well, I have to say the two ladies that spoke earlier on, for me, was very, very powerful and very, yeah, it just left me a bit emotional to take a little break, to be fair. And I kind of say, continue to fight, continue to stay strong, because we need to be guided by individuals like yourself to make change. So, you know, please, thank you for sharing your stories. And as I said, it was very, very difficult for me to kind of listen to, but we need these stories, lived experience, to be heard. For me, I played with Dalian, I played against Dalian, and so hearing of his passing had a real impact on me. The real impact on me was that we are the same age, we are Black men, and that could be me. And so the impact on me was very raw for me. And as I said, we hadn't been in contact. We had been in contact for about that year before this happened, because we were looking to provide some medical support for him and stuff like that. But kind of the conversations kind of phased out, and then obviously this incident happened. So the impact for me was really, really impactful. We were in contact with the mother, the family, and I was more in contact with Dalia's partner, Karen, who we spoke on a number of occasions, and offered therapeutic support to her, therapeutic support to the family. We just wanted to be there, not only as me as a former player, but also as a union, the PFA, be there for the family at this difficult time.
I just want to know that you've written a really powerful journal in the Lancet Psychiatry, and I think Marcia's Aji's journal is going to be just as powerful. Hearing the situation about what we can do, football now is being seen as an institution in a racist environment. Black players are getting abused left, right, and centre. Online abuse is seriously affecting their mental health. We can see it on the TV. People are now thinking about taking the knee. How can football and the situation, Marcia, come together to have a campaign that really addresses the violation of Black people?
I think for me, football is one of the most popular games played in the sport, and I think it's a key that we need to listen to the experiences of individuals that have experienced these deaths, and that we come together. As I said, football is that big that we need to come together and share those lived experiences, so that the public are made aware of what's going on and what that looks like. So from a football perspective, we have to remember that as a union, I look after 3,000 professional footballers each year. If you add this young scholars from 16 to 18, that's another 1,500. And if you add the WSL1, which is the Women's Super League, that's another 200. I deal with 4,700 players a season. We have 50,000 former members that we also deal with in regards to supporting them from a union perspective. For me, out of that 4,000 players, 30% of those are Black players. And for me, we offer, the work that I do in football is that, I look at the emotional side of the game. I look at not the physical side of the game, I look at the emotional side of the game. I believe that not enough is done on the emotional side of the game for players. They are, trained to be physically fit to perform on a Saturday and a Tuesday, but they're not trained or provided with the emotional support that goes with the physical side of the game. They both go hand in hand. So the role for me since 2011 has been to implement emotional support for players. Now, I have been a professional footballer and played the game for 20 years. I have encountered racist abuse from fans. I've encountered racist abuse from other players. I've encountered racist abuse from coaches on my own team. I've encountered this, and I know the mental impact it has on an individual because I've been there myself. So the idea for me was that I recognize when these players, Black players, are encountering these racist abuse, the impact it's having on them. And so for me, what I wanted to do, and I'm looking at in the paper that I wrote for the Lancet Psychiatry, and I thank Niall for aiding me to get it published, and yourself, Dr. King, is that we need to look at another model. The model of work that we have in place, one cap does not fit all. We have different players from different cultures, from African cultures, from Caribbean cultures that play the game of football. One cap doesn't fit all. So what we're going to look at is my thesis research was about the lived experience and the mental health issues that UK players encounter. And what came out of that was the mental health issues that Black players encounter when they are racially abused. So we have to implement, and the model of work that came out of it was the research was that a player-centered model of work needs to be implemented. And when we do this player-centered model of support, it's looking at the cultural issues involved in that. And for me, a transcultural model needs to be implemented. So it's in line with the different individuals that are playing the game of football currently. So for me, emotionally, it's important that we offer support. We have a helpline in place for players now that if they do encounter emotional support online or on the crowds, that they have a helpline number that I've implemented that they can call. And we have the relevant therapists, cultural therapists that are enable these individuals to speak freely about the issues that encountered. this is just a start. More needs to be done, and more needs to be implemented. And I'm just working on that to make that possible for players and individuals to feel comfortable and safe, and coming forward to talk about the issues that they've encountered, and it won't work against them, and that we will hold people accountable for these issues.
Great. My last question, because I think I'm really pleased that you're here to offer it. Professor Tim Kendall said something really revealing in the chat, that he's ashamed to be a white person, and I thank you very much for sharing that. And going back to Marcia's point about the kind of new slavery that's taking place, that's re-emerging. I'm just wondering how we can work with, from your transculture model, to get people in diverse experience to really understand race and what is the Black body and Black men's experiences, and they begin to change the way we actually work across the colour line.
I really would welcome anybody's help and input in trying to implement this. If I'm honest, I need to get the experts in this area to help me implement this. I'm all in regards to this, because it's not about the Black body. That's what football has been about for many years. It's not about the Black body. We have a mind. Do you know what I mean? We think. But we just looked at as a Black body, a commodity, and so we need to look at how we change that narrative and how we give voices to the individuals that are playing the game, because I don't think the individuals are voices are being heard or given a voice as much as they should be. And the whole point about me is trying to empower these individuals, and trying to give them a voice. So I will welcome any individual that's on this call today, and the individual that's spoken earlier on, to come together and do some sort of subcommittee to come together and see how we can implement that.
Great. I mean, that's my last question, but that offer for me is a really important issue about how a workshop can lead to a campaign and change. And Michael's already got a specialist health group that's looking at developing a policy framework for sport and mental health. Michael, thank you very much for your time. That's been unbelievable. I will pass you over to the next person. Thanks for your time, Michael.
Thank you for inviting me. Sorry that I have to shoot because just got work issues to deal with, but thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Colin. Now, we were scheduled to have a short break, but I think what I'm going to do is just move straight on so that we have time for a bit of a discussion at the end of this webinar. So I'm going to introduce Professor Sashitaran, who's going to talk about a case study of the Ethnicity and Mental Health Improvement Project. Sashi.
Thank you, Niall. Thank you, Colin, for asking me to speak at this seminar. I'm a psychiatrist by background, and I have been involved in a project in Southwest London over the last 2 years in trying to address some of the issues and challenges that we have heard about today. The words that Aggie Lewis used ring in my ear. There is time that we do this work ourselves. And that's a very apt summary of where we are at. Over the last 40 years, we have waited for the National Health Service and the government and responsible authorities in this area to address the problems around racism and inequalities within mental health services, including the brutal deaths of people while in psychiatric custody. The story goes back a long way. While Aggie and Marcia are carrying the torch today, there were people before that who raised the same issues with the same passion and commitment, mostly women who have lost their sons or their partners or their fathers within the psychiatric system. I remember Clara Buckley, whose son Orville Blackwood was similarly killed in Broadmoor Hospital. And that was more than 25 years ago. I remember Rocky Bennett, who was also killed in exactly identical fashion in a place that is called a hospital, a secure hospital, but which functioned more like a prison. Several other people a list of over 15 people who have died in psychiatric custody, experiencing what we call psychiatric care in the same way. And we remember them because what they told us was the story that is being repeated time and time again in this context. Unfortunately, nothing has happened over the last 40 years. We have had several reviews, studies, and authoritative reports making serious recommendations how things should change. On the last count, there were over 90 such recommendations. To date, less than 15 have been fully implemented. I, as a psychiatrist working in this area for a long time, very much part of the system, I have lost faith in the ability, capacity, or commitment of our system to make the changes. Our communities need to step up and do it by ourselves. We are not going to change things by having further reviews or frameworks. We are not going to change things by measuring it again and again. We are not going to change it by talking about it again and again. We got to do things. And that's where this particular story starts, in Wandsworth, in Southwest London, where the local communities and local people got so fed up with what was being offered by the local mental health system, they wanted to take things into their own hands. They pushed, they campaigned, they eventually succeeded through a community organization taking the lead, Wandsworth Community Empowerment Network, led by Malik Gul, who has been campaigning in this area for the last 15 years. Eventually brought the statutory sector, the local trust, and the local commissioning group onto the table to talk about how we can change the system, not through further reviews, or not by looking at the same old data that tells the same old story again and again, but we're taking practical actions. And the project that I'm involved in, called Ethnicity and Mental Health Improvement Program, is part of that. And within that, what I want to focus on today is a particular intervention that is aimed to reduce the use of restrictive practice within psychiatric setting, and also detentions under the Mental Health Act for people from Black and minority ethnic communities. It is a very simple concept that we are trying to pursue, but it's based on solid evidence. One of the things that I want you to think about is that there are places in this world, not far from here, where they never use restraint within psychiatric settings. Not far away, in Italy, in a place called Trieste, for 25 years, last 25 years, they have never used restraint, even once, although they deal with similar kinds of difficulties that are presented to them by people from the local population. Their use of forcible treatment or detentions under the local Mental Health Act is one of the lowest in Europe. No one in this country asks the question, if they can do it in Trieste, why can't we do it here? What is it that they've got right in Trieste that we are not even considering in this country? What can we learn from there that can translate into practice here? If you look through the evidence in this area, you can see that restrictive practices, use of force within psychiatric setting is entirely arbitrary. But it is used disproportionately against people of color, particularly people of African and African Caribbean heritage. What happens within our psychiatric system encapsulates what happens across the society. What happens in the psychiatric system is not a reaction to the particular mental health needs or care needs of people from Black and minority communities. It is simply a transaction of racism and racial stereotypes that are constructed and sustained within the psychiatric system. How do we address this? in practical terms? Well, first thing that we suggested was that we should be party to the decisions. Our community should be present when these decisions are being made. Psychiatric hospitals are closed spaces, increasingly closed over the last 20 years. Entry into these places is heavily controlled, especially for families and the local communities. By ensuring that community members participate in these decisions along with the patient and his or her relatives is the first step towards actually opening up this process. What we are going to be doing in Wandsworth, in the local mental hospital, is just that. We are ensuring that every decision that is going to be made in relation to restraint, in relation to seclusion, in terms of forcible intervention of any kind, that will be shared with and involve a member of the family. It will also ensure that in those people who do not require or want their family to be present, we are recruiting people from the local Black community, ordinary members, ordinary citizens of the community, and providing them with the necessary training to be part of that process where a decision is considered for forcible intervention. No individual can be subjected to restraint before that individual has a chance, an opportunity to make contact with that nominated person from the community or his or her own family. And that person, we will ensure, will have to be present in the inpatient setting where these decisions are being considered. 80% of the decisions leading to the use of restraint is preceded by a period when things build up. It's only very rarely in the psychiatric setting that decisions to restraint are taken without any warning or preparation. The majority of such incidents have a period, a lead-up period, during which things can be diffused. Unfortunately, the protagonist in the ward, patient v staff, they are occupying different positions of power. The patient has no power. We want to moderate, reduce that by inviting and ensuring the community members to be present as an ally of the person who is threatened with harm. And that person will have the opportunity to help not only the patient, but also the staff in reaching for alternative management options. The same thing is applied in relation to the use of Mental Health Act. Mental Health Act, the imposition of it, once again, is a slow process. It's only a minority of cases where individuals are subjected to the Mental Health Act without there being a period of consideration, deliberation, preparation. And we want not only a family member, but also a member of the community to be present in assessing, in understanding, and in codifying the risks which the psychiatrist and the social worker might be considering. And that third-party intervention in these processes, we believe, will reduce the use of restrictions as well as the use of the Mental Health Act. The key to it is understanding that every individual's actions, whether in psychiatric settings or otherwise, those are contextual and they are meaningful. We, as psychiatrists and psychiatric practitioners, fail to understand that meaning or take into account the context and the narrative of the patient that we are seeing and that we are threatening with harm. We want to break that open. We want to make that more public. We want to ensure a level of engagement from our communities in that process. And through that, we are confident we will be able to not only help individuals who find themselves trapped in that situation, but also the staff who are engaging in what they themselves consider to be an inhumane practice. This is a project that is been funded and that is being implemented in Wandsworth. I invite all of you who have an interest in this area to come and join us, to help us, to be collaborators in this kind of work, to be involved in discussion and in challenging the local practices, and to be part of the project, to be the community agents who will actually bring about the change in this area and change the mental health system from outside. I will stop there and give people an opportunity to raise any points that they may want. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sashi. One point which I'm just going to follow up on briefly is that you mentioned the Trieste model. And I'm afraid to say I've heard from Alan Francis, who's a very eminent psychiatrist in the United States. He has recently sent us some information that the Trieste model is actually in some danger at the moment. And I'm just going to pop the link to that in the chat so that anyone can look at it if they want to. Now we have about 15 minutes for a Q&A session with everyone who's spoken today. If you have a question, pop it in the chat. We'll try to get around to it if we have the time. Time is, of course, pressing in on us a wee bit here. But I'd just like to start off with a point for discussion, which is that the impression which I've got is that what's needed really is both legislative change and cultural change. And I don't think that one will succeed without the other. So how can we achieve these two things together? Changes in legislation, but also changes in the culture of mental health services. And I'd like to start off by hearing Arjie's thoughts on that, if you're happy to talk about that.
Yes, yeah. Being optimistic, I think what I have really found, and Kevin, we're hoping to see the minister next week, because we found that we need robust implementation. And I am not quite sure if the civil servants quite get it. How much lived experience do they have? What angle are they working from? I just have, uneasiness, because I don't want Cheneys' death to be wasted. We've been through so much. Let us just utilize the fact that it's happened. We want to make change. I don't know. I live in hope, but I do know that robustness may not be what the end result is. For Cheneys Law, I'm just talking about that. I mean, because sometimes I think, what are they doing? Everybody has said we've had, recommendation after recommendation, and it's just, collecting dust. I don't know what is happening. There has to be, for me, there has to be a will to want to make things right from the top down. There is a will going up, but it's from the top down, and I'm just living in hope. But I don't know if Kevin would like to speak more on that,
Yeah, absolutely, Ajie. I think there are a couple of things. I think first of all is just looking at how the system supports the families. So yeah, it's a lot goes on the families themselves to have to advocate for themselves. And I think there is a thing about, well, we talk about in co-production, how there should be roles that are actually designed to support people to get involved and to share their expertise and to pay them for their expertise, because both Adji and Marcia do so much with the trust, and that's not always remunerated. And I think there's something else about joining up all the different frameworks. So we talk about Cheneys Law, Professor Kendall spoke about the Pgraph, and I've worked on Mental Health Act review as well. And a lot of the time the conversations overlap so much, but they're spoken about in different contexts. And I think there's just a case of like really realizing how interlinked they are, and maybe that's an argument to getting more resource behind it.
Yeah, I think you're so right. Yeah, little pockets going on and people don't even realize.
And the last thing I would say is engagement as well. That was something that I found personally useful in the Mental Health Act review. Just like, yeah, a lot of well, racialized communities are like deemed hard to reach and whatever. And actually, when you do manage to engage with them, and it's really not too difficult to do that once there's a proper effort behind it. Once you are able to engage, like the opportunities just seem endless, and there's just so much value in it. And I think there are changes on both sides. You just like learn to trust one another a bit more, and there's so much that can come out of it.
Could I just quickly say, yeah, I agree with what Adji and Kevin has just said. I would just add to that you know what, Dr. Shadi Darani, sorry, don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly. Yeah, you are absolutely spot on. We've been here before. We've had these discussions, the death of Rocky Bennett, and so on and so forth. Yada yada yada. Book. Tick boxes. Say, you know, I'm tired. We're tired. You know, I don't know what more to say. Just get on with it. You know, because people are dying. You know, we've had these conversations before, and I've met them. I mean, I'm relatively new to this. It's 13 years. I'm relatively new. And, you know, I'm astounded that nobody knows what to do. In the meantime, we're wasting money because everybody's getting paid, including all yourselves. We don't. You know, it costs us a lot to our well-being, but it's because of our passion of it, because it's affected us. And, you know, we're the ones that are making the changes. But you can help by like sharing this video to a wider public. You know, be more seen, that you'll be more open and robust publicly, and not just on paper for yourselves. It's of no use to us. At the end of, I'm not ridiculing the work that you're doing. I'm not. But you know, if you wanted to make effective change now in the digital ages, you know, is to just be open and frank. And all we need is accountability. So let's give an example. It can be done. Okay, it wasn't mental health, but it was still an injustice. In Sarah Everard, robust, none of the evidence was covered up. You know, that somebody's gone to prison for life. Yeah, this was a white woman. There's white privilege. And I'm not saying that shouldn't have happened, but it just proves that they all know what to do. Just get the hell on with it. That's I'm trying to be polite. But we're all grown-ups here.
No, that's
it's bullshit, basically.
I think you're raising a really important point, Marcia, which is that it's the question of how, you know, we move from statements and from things on print to actual change. And I wonder if there is perhaps some degree of resistance within the culture of mental health services, what the nature of that resistance is and how it can be overcome. And I'd be interested, Sashi, in your thoughts on this.
You tell me.
So thank you very much. I'm absolutely convinced that our mental health services are not going to bring about the change we want. It's not just that they are not committed to it. They just don't have the capability to understand, implement changes. They do not. They're not programmed to do that. Whatever Tim Kendall says here today at the meeting, his ability to shift the dial here is, I would say, zero. So we go back to doing the same old things that we have done for 40 years. Further reviews, further measurements, more frameworks, and people continue to die. People continue to be restrained. If anything, the latest statistics show that the proportion of Black people being detained in mental health services has gone up in the last 2 years. It's a general problem across the country that the detention rates are going up, but more so for people from our communities. And no mental health trust in this country, as far as I know, is seriously committed to reducing that through practical measures, making people accountable for their decisions. Being asked the question, simple question, why are you restraining somebody? Or registering it, identifying it as a serious untoward incident that causes harm potentially, that compromises patient safety. Every time that happens, it has become routine. It has become integrated in the culture of psychiatry. No consultant psychiatrist I know wonders why he or she is having to force people. It has become, we have become inured to that. And that is going to change. And that won't change through law. We had an opportunity through the review of the Act. We ended up with a damn squib at the end of it. None of those recommendations is going to make the slightest bit of change to the experience of BME communities. And I would also point out that our practitioners on the ground, the nurses who do the holding down of Black bodies and injecting them, are mainly Black now. And they are seriously traumatized by what they have to do. We did a series of focus groups and it came up very clearly. They're absolutely terrified, traumatized, and helpless. And they want to be together with the patients that they're harming, but they're not able to do that. They realize nothing happens. They realize it's routinized. So the only way it's going to change is through people like Marcia, through people like Ajibola, and people on the ground taking action. And that's what we are doing. We are fed up waiting for people to do things for us. We are getting there. We are getting the community into those spaces. We are challenging those clinical decisions. And until we challenge the clinical decisions, how a psychiatrist makes the decision or a nurse makes the decision to actually hold somebody down and inject them, we got to challenge that at that level. And that's where we go to be at. And our project, we hope, will be a start, a small start. And that's why I'm very keen to involve everybody in that, to come and see what we are doing, be part of that, and continue to generate momentum, anger, and resistance through meetings like this, through the experiences, harrowing experiences that we have heard.
This is a challenge really to some very fundamental basic assumptions and frameworks which people take into practice. And I'd be very interested to know from Kevin how this relates to the findings of your research.
So what specifically is the question?
Yeah, and the question is that what's actually said is that, you know, it's the case that consultants and other people on wards might not question the assumptions behind their actions.
Yeah.
And I wonder if this has been reflected in your research, and if this is indeed the case, how you go about really challenging these very sort of fundamental things which people are bringing to practice and which are potentially extremely harmful.
Yep. So two things come to mind. First of all is our training. So I'm aspiring to be a clinical psychologist. We have clinical psychologists and psychiatrists in the room. And very little of our training would make me immediately think of, say, Adji and Marcia and what they've gone through and what their families have gone through. There's just a bit of a disconnect there in what's traditionally taught. And we, I suppose, have to think differently about how we cover those issues I mentioned the course we're doing called Cheneys Story that will have Aji teaching on it amongst other people. And I would love for that kind of stuff to be like when I try to get onto clinical training, I want that to be as part of our course. Another thing that comes to mind is a bit different, but it's the sort of professional roles. And I mentioned police clinician interactions, and when police come onto the ward, and actually what some mental health staff were saying was that they almost feel responsibility to defer to the police because they've called the police, and almost like it can be hard to challenge the police in that scenario. The police are quite used to taking control over a situation when they're called on it. And I think there's just a real need for an open discussion on that kind of culture of when police are on mental health wards, that the mental health staff are still taking the primary responsibility over that. So I think there are just a lot of areas that aren't really spoken about on clinical training that really need to be spoken about. And the way to open up that conversation is through having people like Aji and Marcia and people from the community teaching on our courses.
I mean, I get the message from that what's really needed is to get in early in the training, and to have the value of the terrible experiences which Aji and Marcia have described, to convey those to trainees, and to really start off by addressing these assumptions and these frameworks, at the very beginning of people's careers in mental health services, to really get that necessary cultural change. Now, I have noticed that the time is now 2 o'clock, so time is up on the webinar and the time we have allotted. So I'd just like to end by thanking all of our speakers, thanking VBP and Ren, and thanking Colin, also thanking Sade for her chairing of the discussion between Aji and Marcia. And I'm going to now hand back to Aji and Marcia to give the concluding remarks. Thank you.
Just really like to thank Colin for, I think Colin only calls me because I live near his favourite football ground. So he calls me because I live near Crystal Palace to find out I'm cussing them because they're parking in our road. But Colin, thank you, really thank you for giving Marcia and I and Kevin the opportunity to share such a august platform. It's really, they say you learn every day. You really do. I've learned so much. And, I just want to really remind everybody about our march. But Marcia is very good at that. So I'm going to leave Marcia to remind everybody about the United Family and Friends and our campaigns. And if you Google our names, you'll see about the campaigns, or Google loved ones. And the other site that is very good is Inquest, the charity. We work very closely with them, and they supported us with our lawyer, Raji Bhatt, who's brilliant. And, Marcia does a lot of work with them. We both do a lot of work with them and the family reference group. So Marcia, over to you. And thank you, everybody for having us and for listening and for responding. I'm not very tech minded, but I can see the chat, and thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Aji, and thank you all for having us. So I will wrap up to tell you all a little bit more about the United Families and Friends campaign, which is a coalition of families across this country, not just Black families, everybody whose loved ones have died at the hands of the state, be it in police custody, in prisons, and or mental health units, or
Hillsborough.
Pardon?
Hillsborough.
Yeah,
and
the Hillsborough campaign,
Grenville.
The Bloody Sunday campaigns. We consist of a large amount of families that over the years that we've united with and speak with, including internationally. And once a year we remember our loved ones, and it's the last Saturday of October of every year. I think this is the 23rd year. It was set up by the families of Joy Gardner, who was choked to death, who was, tape was put around her face, in the 90s, and the Brian Douglas, where he was hit over the head with a truncheon, and the families of Roger Sylvester, also black mental health and police restraint. They set up UFFC, which is really important that we remember our loved ones. So this Saturday, Trafalgar Square, 12 noon, where you can meet families, and we walk down Whitehall and we speak outside number 10 Downing Street, and we usually hand over a letter where we write to the government, and they've never afforded the families a meeting in the 20 odd years, and then they don't correspond fully. They have the last few years, but those letters are public. You can go on our website and read the letters that we have written. Also, we will be putting the state on trial. If you Google People's Tribunal, where we are working with Black Lives Matter and Ken Farrow, the film director who's done the film Injustice, and an update is to the film Ultraviolence, where you hear directly from the families, and to show the trauma that we receive indefinitely. So you can look on the website, the People's Tribunal, and the Mikey Powell National Memorial Fund. We all work together. We need funding. Families do not get automatic funding and legal aid for representation. We don't get funeral costs. We don't get bereavement counselling. We don't get nothing. We only get injustice. We need justice and accountability. We need practical support. If you go on those websites, you can see how you can practically support us. Share the information on Twitter, on Instagram and TikTok. We need to get to the younger generation. As much people as possible that can be there. This includes the death of Sever Everard, right down to the last 50 years of injustices, and we remember our loved ones, and they will never be forgotten. Support us in that way. I would love if Michael Bennett could be there to support the families and speak on behalf of the Daly and Atkinson family. I think that's a really important case. And if not, I will introduce the public to you, Michael, if you're unable to make it. But I'm looking forward to speaking with you and all the other panelists again in this room. Thank you very much for your...
Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you.